Music theory with Excel. Mirror inverse intervals for the Locrian mode. Get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin'. And for that, of course, you need Microsoft Excel. We are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we basically built this from a blank worksheet, but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just build the part of the worksheet we're working on this time. If you do have access to this workbook though, 4 tabs down below: fretboard, example, practice, blank. The fretboard tab having a simulated fretboard we will refer back to. The example tab having the finished product, in essence the answer key. The practice tab has pre-formatted cells, so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that's okay, because we'll be working in the blank tab where we built this from a blank worksheet, and we'll be continuing to work in the blank or less formatted part of the worksheet going forward, practicing both our Excel skills and music skills at the same time. Let's go to the fretboard tab to get an idea of what we will be doing, noting our objective to try to think about the intervals as a distance nomenclature without letting the terminology and the implications of it pull us out of the optimal way to visualize the fretboard, which is as a map of the territory, similar to our globe having 7 continent destination locations, the other 5 locations being similar to the oceans, things we pass through to get to the continent locations, this being the low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling. If we're out in space, like our head up above the fretboard, we imagine the fretboard spinning around. It has 7 degrees of spin that we are imagining. We label those with the notes and assign the 7 notes related to the major scale that we call out, usually working in the key of C, but noting that if we move to C sharp or D sharp, the whole continent would shift, just like the world spinning around in a circle. And therefore, once we know the degree of influence, we're not going to be looking at the note names per se, but rather at the continent names, which are like the Nashville number system, names 1 through 7, or those are basically the modes: Ionian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, and so on and so forth. The problem being that our terminology in terms of chords and in terms of measurement, scale degrees is what is typically used. That's a problem because I don't want to think in scale degrees, because that forces me to rename the measurement system. I'd like to just think about the node that I'm on and how far away I'm going from that node. And if I'm going to use context within a song, I'd rather that context be the mode or nodal point, rather than forcing myself to make this the one every time I measure from a particular point. If there is no context and I just want to measure from this point to this point, I shouldn't be using scale degrees or modal half steps or anything. I should just say, well, that's 4 notes away. And I should be able to know that 4 notes away is the thing that makes it sound like a major third, right? It's not the major third name, it's the distance, the interval distance. So I think we kind of lose that sometimes, particularly in the guitar when we're focused just on shape, that we lose the concept of distance, and the naming conventions further that problem, that confusion. All right, so let's go to the example tab. Remembering our analogy, we're going to imagine that if this is frets 5 through 8, we can imagine our continents would be here, 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 and here. 7 continents, and then we have 5 oceans between some of those continents. If I put that in a circle, which is the best way to envision distance, because we envision the distance going around pitch-wise, either we can go clockwise or counterclockwise, counting just the continents or counting the continents and the oceans. So if I'm going from this 4 to this number 7, I would like to count distance. Clockwise would be 1, 2, 3 steps forward, instead of scale degree, making that the 1, in which case it would be a scale degree of 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th scale degree. But I don't want to make that the 4th scale degree. I want to keep that as the 4, or the continent name, Australia in this case, and say I'm going up 1, 2, 3 modal half steps. If I include the oceans, we would be going up one ocean and then a continent and then an ocean, continent, ocean, continent. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That would be equivalent to a note distance. But also note that I could go counterclockwise. That would be 1, 2, 3, 4, -4. Going backwards, counterclockwise, -4 steps. Or we can count the oceans, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 backwards. Now, our naming convention for the intervals are based on scale degrees that always go one way. So we have to rename the scale degree. That would then be the 1. Everything is off by 1 from a measurement standpoint, and they're really only designed to measure clockwise, even though counterclockwise is a thing. We can go around the block clockwise, we can go around the block counterclockwise, we can count it up by modal half steps, or we can count it up and back by notes. All right, so given that, that's what we're working on over here. We named the normal, we named our notes over here. We pulled the 7 notes, which are like the continents. We're working in the key of C and the 7 related modes, although all other 12 modes would be the same in terms of the related positions, just like the globe spinning around. So we then said, if we're just going clockwise, and we're not talking about octaves, we're just going around in a circle, then we can have distances of 1 through 11. We named then the normal naming conventions here, noting that most of the time people don't say the distance in notes like a 7 note away perfect fifth. But I recommend that we do that because that reminds us that the distance is the important thing. The perfect fifth isn't the important thing. The perfect fifth is another name for 7 notes away. 7 notes away is the important thing. And so we also note that this is based on the major scale, which isn't really optimal. I would like to know the distances from each of the nodal points, each of the 7 nodal points. So that's going to be our naming convention over here that we're going to be coming up with to deal with that. And we also are dealing with the idea that we should have distance. I should go counterclockwise. So if I go counterclockwise, we don't have a normal naming convention for it. So we could use the current naming convention, and remember that all those names could be going forward or backwards. So a perfect fifth could be also -5-step perfect fifth. But that's still not the best way or perfect way to be naming things, because it's still naming just based on the major key, and it doesn't really make sense to see the perfect fifth scale degree, because you think you can go 7 minus 5. It should be a distance term. So we've been working on the distance terms over here, and we did the majors and the minors, and now we're going to look at the Locrian. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide from the Dorian on over to the Aeolian. Right click and hide those cells. Don't delete them, just hide them. So now I can see the normal naming convention over here, the Ionian naming convention, the Aeolian, which is a major and minor, and then the Locrian is kind of like the minor, meaning it has a minor third and other minor intervals. However, it's got the flat 5, which means it's going to be the diminished. That's the thing that makes it strange. Okay, so let's say we're going to be on the Locrian node now. So if we're on the Locrian node and we go back 1, we'd be going back to the Aeolian. So we're going back to the Aeolian mode. Let's look at it over here and say we're going to find the Locrian mode. Let's go all the way down here. I don't know why I had to go all the way down. Wait a sec. It's the Locrian is right there. Boom. And how many steps up? 2 steps backwards. So -2. So I'm going to say -2 backwards if I go back, and that's going to give us then the NA. So that's going to be the Locrian. It's going to be an NA. That's the modal range. So the modal range from a Nashville number note system would be going from 7 to 6. I could go 7 around the horn, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or back 7 backwards, 7, 6. So we're going to call that a distance of -2 notes back from the N, which is the Locrian note. Hold on, I got to do this first. This is going to be -2 from the N or Locrian mode, and it's the -1st modal half step back. Again, I'm not going to put 2 negatives in here. I'm just going to imagine that negative follows through. So if it was the first modal half step back, we would think that that would be the second scale degree, but under the normal system, we don't have scale degrees typically. So we'd have to say, well, if it's 2 back, that would be 12 minus 2, which would be 10 forward. That would be a minor 7. So if you used a normal name, I would say a minor 7 could be 10 forward or -2 backwards. In our system, we're going to say it's going to be the first modal half step backwards, 7 minus 1 would be 6 forward. So that would be a 10 note away Locrian 6. That would be the in A modal range, or the in A modal range could also be a -2 from in -1. Again, I'm not going to put a negative, but it's still a negative first modal half step backwards. All right, so notice that that matches what's on the Aeolian, because it's closer to the minor mode, and it has a minor 7 if you want to think about it that way, but it's not on the major. So the Locrian is closer to the minor. Let's say we go from the N to the 1 past the A. So if I go N, 1, 2 to the X, what's the distance? If I go here, 1, 2, 3, 4, we're going 4 up. So there's the -4, or we're going 4 backwards, or a -4. So that's going to be an NX modal range. We're going to call that then a 7-5 modal range. The distance is going to be then -4 notes backwards from the N node, which is going to be the -2nd modal half step, which would be the -3rd scale degree if there were scale degrees, but there's not. So we just have to say, if I go 4 notes back, 12 minus 4 would be 8, right? So we'd say, okay, that would be 8 forward, that would be a minor 6, and therefore a minor 6 could either be 8 forward or 4 back. For us, we're going to say it's the -2nd modal half step backwards. 7 minus 2 would be 7, 6, 5. So you'd have 5 modal half steps forward, which would be here. So that would be a 5. Wait a second, that's not there. It'd be an 8 note away Locrian 5th modal half step, which would be the NX modal range, or the NX modal range could be a -4 in -2nd modal half step backwards. So then we also note that this distance, which is equivalent to a minor 6, will be in the Aeolian, but it is not in the major scale. It's in the minor scale, but not in the major scale. Once again, the Locrian lining up more to the minor than the major. So let's look at the next one. We're going into the one after the X. So let's go to the N to the one after the X, 1, 2, 3. So it's the 3rd modal half step backwards. So how many notes is that? So if I go to the N, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, -6. So there's the -6. And this is going to be an NY modal range. It's going to be a 7-4 modal range. And the distance is going to be a -6 distance from the N node, which is the -3rd modal half step back, which would be the -4th scale degree if there were scale degrees, but we don't have scale degrees. So if it was -6 backwards, that would be 12 minus 6, or 6 forward, which we would call a diminished 5th typically, or it could be an augmented 4th in some cases. In this case, it's going to be a diminished 5th. And so the diminished 5th could either be 6 notes forward or 6 notes backwards, because we're right in the middle. For us, it makes more sense because we're going to say it's the -3rd modal half steps backwards, and 7 steps minus the 3 would give us 4 modal half steps forward. So that would be a 6 note away N 4th modal half step forward, which would be the NY modal range, or the NY modal range could be the -6 in -3 modal half steps backwards. Noting that that's the one 6 notes away is the thing that should ring the bell saying, oh, that's the weird one. That's not in the minor, or it's not in the major. So again, you could say, well, that's the flat 5. That's what most people will see. It's the flat 5 that rings the bell in my head and say, oh, that's the tensiony sound. But really, it's the tensiony sound. The thing that should ring the bell in the head is it's 6 notes away. That's the thing that rings the bell, that should ring the bell, right? It should be the distance telling us the flavor that of the interval, and then we can compare the distances of the different locations, right? Anyways, we're going to go to the next ones, N to the one after the Y. So if we're on the N, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth modal half step backwards to the P. Let's do that from here to get to the P. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So -7 notes back. There's the -7. So I'm going to call that then the NP modal range. And that's going to be in Nashville number system terminology, the 7-3 modal range, which has a distance of -7 steps backwards from the N node, which is the -4th modal half step backwards, which would be the -5th scale degree if we had scale degrees, but we don't. So what do we call it? If it's -7 and I went 12 minus 7, that would be 5 forward. We call that a perfect fourth. So 5 forward is typically a perfect fourth, and therefore 12 minus or 7 backwards also you can kind of think of as a perfect fourth. Makes more sense this way though, because now I can say that if we're going -4 half steps backwards, 7 minus 4 would be 3 modal half steps forward. So 3 modal half steps forward is going to be here. So we have a 3 note away in second modal half step forward, which would be still the ND modal range. Wait a sec, I'm on an NP modal range. It's the 4 half steps backwards would be 4, 5, 6, 3 forward. So that would be a 5 in third modal half step forward would be the NP modal range, or the NP modal range could be -7 in -4 modal half steps backwards. And the distance is the thing that's important. In this case, 7, which we probably know the inverse better, meaning 12 minus 7 or 5. So 5 notes away is the thing that should tell us, and -7 should tell us kind of the feel of it, not the fact that we call it a perfect fourth. The perfect fourth is telling us the distance, right? The distance is the important thing that should trigger in our mind which like modes this thing is in. That's not how it works for many, particularly guitarists, because we're learning it by shape, right? And then these interval names kind of get in our mind as a shape, losing the context of distance altogether, many times not even saying or having an idea of what the distance is, even going clockwise. We'd like to fix that so you can kind of figure out what you're doing on the fretboard more systematically. All right, let's go to the next one after the N, after the P. So I'm going to go from the N to the one after the P. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's the -5th modal half step backwards. So I'm going to go from the N to the D. Here's the N. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. -9 half steps. There's the -9. So I'm going to go over here and say the modal range is going to be an ND modal range. It's going to be then a 7-2 modal range. It's going to be a -9 distance from the Locrian node, node N, which would be the -5th modal half step, which would be the -6th scale degree if we had scale degrees, but we don't. So what do we typically do? We say, well, if it's 9 backwards, 12 minus 9 would be 3 forwards. We call that a minor third. Therefore, you want to start thinking of the minor third as 3 forward, but also 9 backwards. That's how I would deal with it. Or you can use this terminology and say, if we're going -5 modal half steps backwards, 7 minus 5 would be 2 forward. So we're going to say 2 forward. So it would be a 3 note away in second modal half step forward would be an ND modal range, or the ND modal range would be -9 in -5 modal half steps backwards. So that distance then of 3 notes, that's the thing. 9 notes back would be 3 notes forward, should tell you that that's the flavor of a minor third. And you can see that that minor third is in the Aeolian, but it's not in the Ionian. It's in the minor scale, but not in the major scale. Once again, the Locrian being closer to the minor than the major. All right, let's go to the next one. We're going to say the one after the D. So we're going to go to the N up to the one after the D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Negative 6 modal half steps backwards to the I. So if I'm on N, what's the distance? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Negative 11. So there's the 11. We're going to call that an NI modal range. Locrian to Ionian modal range, which is going to be Nashville numbers of 7 to 1. And I'm going to call that a distance of negative 11 from the N node, Locrian. And that's going to be then 6. And then this is going to be a sixth modal, negative 6 modal half steps backwards, which would be the negative 7th scale degree if we were doing scale degrees. So if I go back on over here, we're not doing scale degrees when we go backwards typically. So I'd say if I'm going 11 backwards, 12 minus 11 would be 1 forward, which we would call a minor second. So the minor second could either be 1 step forward or 11 steps backwards then. I would like to say that if we go negative 6 modal half steps backwards, it would be 7 minus 6, which would be 1 modal half step forward. So that means that the 1 node away Locrian first modal half step is the NI modal range, or the NI modal range is also negative 11 in negative 6 modal half steps backwards. And that distance then is going to tell us that 1 note forward, which is also 6 notes backward, or 6 modal steps forward, or 1 modal step forward, 6 modal steps backwards, would give us that 1 note distance forward, or 11 backwards, which is the weird distance you only see on like the Phrygian. So that's not in the Aeolian, that's not in the Ionian. So we have 2 intervals on the Locrian, not in either, that being the 6 note away distance, and that also being the 1 note away distance going forward, or 11 backwards. All right. So now let's go and put the ones in the middle. So this is going to be an NN negative, we're going to call it. And that's going to be a 7 to the 6.5 modal range because it's 0.5 above the 6, 0.7 below the 7. And I'm going to call that a distance of negative 1 from the Locrian node. It's going to be 0.05. So it's going to land us in the ocean. So if I go a distance of 1 back from the Locrian, you can see that that lands us, of course, in the ocean. All right. That's not true on like the Ionian. If I go on the Ionian and 1 back, it doesn't land us in the ocean, right? So let's go to the next one up. We're going to say, all right, let's go to then this one and say this is going to be an NA negative. That's going to be going from a modal range of a 7 to a 7 to a 5.5. 5.5 because it's going to be 1 or 0.5 less than the 6, 0.5 more than the 5, which gives us a distance of a 3 note away from the Locrian node. It's going to be a negative 1.5 modal half steps, and this should be a negative. And so that means that if I go on the Locrian and 3 negative, 3 notes negative, 1, 2, 3, lands us in the ocean. Let's do the next one. We're going to say this is going to be the NX negative. NX negative, and that's going to be the modal range of a 7 and 4.5 because it's going to be 0.5 below the 5, 0.5 above the 4, which is going to give us a negative, and we're going to say this is a 5 from the Locrian node. It's going to be a negative 2.5 modal half steps backwards. So that means that if I'm on the Locrian and I go negative 5 notes up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it lands us in the ocean. Let's do this one. This is going to be an NP negative. Modal range in numbers will be a 7 to a 2.5 modal range. Distance is going to be a negative 8 node away from the Locrian node, negative 4.5 modal half steps. So if I'm on the Locrian and I go up 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Once again, lands us in the ocean. I'm going negative 8. All right, and then lastly, let's do this one. This is going to be an D negative modal range, which has a number modal range of 7 to 1.5, which is going to have a distance of a negative 10 node away from the Locrian node, negative 5.5 modal half steps backwards. So if I'm on the Locrian then, and I go back 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, lands us in the ocean. All right. So now we've gone over all of our intervals. This is really kind of the nuts and bolts that I think confuses most people, because this is where the naming convention forces us into the scale degree thing, which is really can cause all kinds of problems from how you visualize your fretboard or whatever your instrument is. So it would be a lot better or cleaner if you at least recognize that these are distance terms, and then when we're, even if we use the standard terms, to start to memorize them just as distance terms. Meaning if someone says, I'm talking about a major third, we want to see it as 4 notes away or negative 8 notes away, a distance term. And that's gonna help not to go into a lot of kind of problems. And then we can also then more easily compare what is the distance from each of the nodes that we're on. So that's going to be the general idea. Now, the next thing we'll introduce is the idea that we do have distance that goes past just 1 octave. So it will repeat in one sense, but it's also different than if we're in the same octave. So we should introduce the idea of what's going to happen when we're up in and go up another octave, and how can we kind of put that in our distance terminology possibly. And that will also possibly be useful when we start thinking about chords, which could be a little bit more complicated when we have inversions, or when we have like one note that's in a different octave or something like that.